and we're going to get things going. Hi, Frank. How are you doing?
Very good. Just thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And I know no one's in the room right now. I want to give a shout out to Johnson Historical Society, where I work as the Youth and School Programs Coordinator, and they let us use the presentation hall here for absolutely free for this. So big shout out to JHS for that. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a lot better than my apartment or outside in the snow.
Yeah.
Adds a different level of immersion. Begin, just so we all know, I am still probably the most technologically inept 32-year-old you'll ever meet in your life. So if things go a little weird, please bear with me. So to begin, just to start out, right, a little bit about Razmafar as an organization. We're dedicated to the research, interpretation, and revival of the historical martial arts of Persian warriors all throughout history. Obviously, it gets a little murky with going back to ancient Persia, but we focus mostly on the Middle Ages. And it was founded by a man known as Dr. Shamshir Khorasani, and it's based off of about 10 years of translating various Persian manuals, manuscripts, other primary sources, looking at different miniatures, rock reliefs, things like that. You might be wondering, where are these sources? Well, very, very difficult for Americans and people in the West to get a hold of, but because he is an Iranian living in Germany, he's able to get to a lot of different museums and archives that most people here in the West can't, and a lot of these are from the National Museum of Tehran, the Kremlin Armory, and a lot of really, the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. There's a lot of really great places that we can't access, but he was able to get through over the last 10 years and really dig into these sources and get a good understanding of how Persian warriors fight. So the manuals are included, but they're not limited to the Shamshir and Sipar, which is pretty much the Shamshir, what we're here talking about, Sipar, which is the shield, the Nizeh, which is our version of the spear, wrestling, as well as mounted archery. And that's not even really the tip of the iceberg. Persians have written about the use of axes, uses of maces, uses of daggers. There is a lot going on in these manuals, but for today, we're just gonna focus on the Shamshir, which is what you see me holding right now. I'm gonna get a little bit, let's pull this up 1 second. I'm gonna get a little bit of a better view. You know, the classical Persian Shamshir that we've all probably grown to know and love. And that is the particular weapon that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so a little bit more about me, just so we know a little bit of my background. As Matt so graciously said already, that I am an educator and I have a master's degree in public history. And I've worked in museums for a very, very long time. Worked for National Geographic, as well as ed program coordinator for Historic New England. I did some advising for the Travel Channel a few years ago. And I'm currently teaching art history. So I'm making a transition from the museum setting to the school setting, because let's face it, they kind of need good teachers right now. I'm also an active member of the Mounted Archery Association of America. So hopefully soon we'll be able to get up on horse and show some more awesome mounted archery techniques. But enough of that. Before we begin, even in the chat or whatever, does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Anything right now? I'll give you 10 seconds to type something in the chat. Go in teacher mode.
Any chance we could get a link to that Persian Society? Drop it in the chat at some point.
The what?
Yeah, the Persian Society you mentioned.
The Historical Society?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely throw that in later. I'll get that in. Thank you. So to begin, why is my talk here called Scimitars Aren't Real? Well, I want to do a little bit of an experiment. All right, let's have a little bit of fun. And we're going to go onto Google together, and we're going to literally just Google search the term scimitar. And let's see what beautiful creations pop up, shall we? So I'm going to go ahead and get a screen share and put on scimitar. All right, so we should be seeing my screen now. Are we seeing my screen? All right.
We are.
So let's see this beauty that we get. I froze a little bit. Did I freeze?
You're all
Mike?
set.
All right. All right, so immediately in these initial image results in vocabulary here, we have a short sword with a curved blade that broadens towards the point, originally used in Eastern countries. Wow, wow, that is very, very specific. Eastern countries. And what do they show underneath this? Well, they show a Turco-Mongol saber, a pair of crossed Afghan knives, a fantasy dao thing, a Moroccan dagger, and that is definitely an elven short sword. So there's a lot to unpack with this right now. So yeah, as you see, guys, scimitars are real, right? Like they're real in the fact that they're made up. But over here on the right, though, it's interesting because we do have, right? We have these two museum examples, what appears to be a Mamluk saber and an Ottoman pala, right next to these two other weird amalgamations that Morgan Freeman might have used in Robin Hood. So there's just so much happening, and I want to get to the bottom real quick of like why this is happening. I'll take off screen share right now and carry on. So why is this happening? What created this? This is most likely a translation of the term or the word Shamshir, which is the Farsi or Persian word for sword, and that's what it means. There are swords in the Iranian language that date back as early as the Achaemenid period in early Farsi, where Shamshir just means sword, plain and simple. But for today, we're referring just to a curved type. But it's also funny because you hear people a lot say the term scimitar sword, but that's the same thing as saying chainmail and chai tea. So you're just saying sword twice. It doesn't make any sense. But over time, this mistranslation referred to, or mispronunciation rather, sorry, better wording, referred to any weapon with a curved blade from the Middle East, North Africa, or even as far over as India. And essentially what we have happening is Persianate societies were most likely the first society that introduced the word to European travelers. If you look at John Chardin, travels to Persia in the 17th century, you know, that is when European and Persian relations got very, very friendly. You know, people don't realize this, but prior to that, there was the Habsburg Safavid alliance and even European powers reaching out to Timur to try to combat the Ottomans. So Persianate societies and European societies were often at times more aligned than they were at odds during the Middle Ages and early modern period. But by this time period, right, Persian blades were so curved and so deep in that curvature that the term was taken to use for any sword in the Orient. So this was not helped by just the European ignorance of different societies and Orientalist writing, especially Orientalist curation. If you look at the way some weapons were curated in the early 20th century, things were literally just called scimitars because, hey, people from Afghanistan, same thing as the people from Iran. So let's all call it a scimitar. So now we're going to play another fun little visual game here. Go back to sharing the screen. I'll give us all another chance to share in a second. So, sorry, good. So let's take a look, shall we? Just to show how this whole thing gets convoluted. The first weapon I'm going to show you is indeed a Shamshir of the curved type common to the Safavid era. And you see on the screen in front of us, it's very curved. It's very elaborately, sorry, not elaborately, it's very, very curved. And this was being used throughout like the 16th century. And that's when they really got this deep curvature. Believe it or not, there are pieces that got even more curved. It got crazier as time went on. So if this is the original scimitar, as in a mispronunciation of Shamshir or mistranslation, apparently that's also a scimitar, because you've probably seen this pop up in search results. Or for example, in the latest episode, or one of the last episodes of Night Fight, I'm not going to go into it, picking on that show, I have friends who work on it, but in one of these episodes of Night Fight, they talk about the scimitar sword, and this is what gets pulled out. But first off, this is an Ottoman pala, and they talk about it as if it's a Persian Shamshir. It's not a Persian Shamshir, it's an Ottoman pala. Clearly inspired from the Shamshir, but not the same weapon. Much shorter. You see at the very tip, there's the broad-headed Yaman, which helps with some, heavier impact. It's pretty crazy. More concussive and more cutting power that Yaman helps with. But clearly, it's not a Shamshir. So if this is a Shamshir, that's also a Shamshir. According to this Orientalist mindset, that's a Towar from India. Oh, and you guessed it, there's more coming. This Powar from Afghanistan. Can anyone guess what this is? A scimitar. And last but not least, Damon's going to be cringing right now, because I've also seen this called a scimitar, which is an Ethiopian shotel. So, as you can see, the term that originated in Persia passed on to Europeans and continued on through this Orientalist misunderstanding of different cultures and the weapons that they produce. It's something that, I'm hoping to work on and hoping to get a much better understanding through presentations like this. So before we go on to the next part, I'm going to open the floor back up either through audio or chats. Any questions so far, or does this make sense of what I'm talking about? I guess no questions is good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could just also discuss some of the iconography that you see within a number of different cultures, such as the crossed blades that you showed earlier in the Google search, on flags and stuff, and how that relates to it. And is the scimitar also influencing the cultures in their own cultures with just a generalization?
That's a very good point. I think it is, and the reason I can say that is because a lot of cultures today, right, have kind of lost a bit of a connection to their pre-modern past. And if you look in places like Turkey today, it's coming back, right? There was a very, very large disconnect, especially after World War I, between like what made you a Turk or what made you an Ottoman. So I think a lot of the times, like these curved swords that are crossing up become this way to reconnect to your cultural past, but you're still not quite aware of the differences that exist between the weapons that were used in your country and the popularized image of them. Like how there are still people, some people of European descent nowadays who look at like overhanded swords that you see in fantasy games, and they're like, that's a two-handed claymore. It's just, they don't know. So we got to be better educated about it. I hope that makes sense. I see that laugh react, Tristan. Yeah, it's true. All right, so question on the size. Is there room in the world for a term that simply means curved Middle Eastern saber? I'm thinking of how we use cavalry saber to reference a million different swords or arming sword with the same large variety. Anton, I agree with David. They always mention scimitar. Yeah, that's fair. But I think for all intents and purposes, we can just say saber. I mean, if it's easier enough for a Western audience to understand saber, but at least I would say give the decency of not just saying Eastern saber, say Persian saber, Turkish saber, Indian saber, Afghan saber. At least give the decency to give these cultures credit and don't just lump them in to a broad category of curved sword. So thank you for your questions. I am going to move on because we still do have some other things to talk about. All right, so all in all with this, the scimitar as an historical sword is not real in the way that you think, right? It is real. The idea of a scimitar has become a thing, a curved sword used by people in the desert that you don't understand. You know, you think about, in looking into pop culture, right? I don't know if there's any Elder Scrolls or Skyrim fans here in the chat, but like they make a big, huge deal out of the fact that the Red Guards in Skyrim are using curved swords. They make a huge deal out of it because it's the other. So it came, I think, as a pop culture amalgamation. In that case, a pop culture or populist Orientalist identification. That's true. Scimitars are real fantasy weapons. Think about the dude in Indiana Jones. He runs out with that big two-handed curved sword, bringing it around, flying it around to get shot. Yeah, that's a scimitar, but it's not a Persian Shamshir. And I think all in all, the term, like I said, it's Orientalist, it's ignorant, and it's very unfair to the many cultures that produce these weapons, and they should be made distinct from one another. I know that can be kind of a hot take, and I've made I made some enemies saying things like that, but I just don't care. Fire me, cancel me. But the idea is that these cultures need to be shown respect. So moving on to the Persian Shamshir itself, its history. So we have to remember is that prior to the conquest of Persia by the Arabs, the swords you saw in that region were straight swords and they were double-edged, right? Look at like Sassanid swords, you can Google search it yourself later, but Sasanian Persian swords were straight double-edged swords. And Arab swords at the same time were straight and double-edged. But what we've got now is it's commonly believed also that those swords, the curved swords, didn't show up in Iran until the Mongol conquest of the 13th century, or that they didn't develop a deep curvature until the 16th century. But we've got new primary source and archaeological evidence is proving actually both of these incorrect. And also that straight and curved swords have existed side by side in Persia, and that the deep curvature gradually evolved. Hold on a second, I got a question in the chat, let me just see. Anton, that's a good question. All I would say to that, if I'm interpreting this correctly, if I'm reading it correctly, is that even then, I think you should still be saying at least a saber from the region, even if it's saying Slavic saber, Mongol saber, at least, even if it's European. I'm not like discriminating from the east to west, just like how I think it should be. You can see, I think how you should be saying a German longsword the same way you should be saying an Italian longsword. One produced in Milan, one produced in Germany. I just think it should be differential. It should still be made. But why is saber and not scimitar? Why is the category saber more valid than scimitar? Because I think saber is just a much easier way to start conveying that information to people. And yes, it might be slightly more Eurocentric in terminology, but it's a better way to start conveying the point that these cultures are different. Saber, in my opinion, does not have as much as a negative connotation as the word scimitar. I view the scimitar as a slightly racist term, and we can discuss that more as we go. But again, time is running out, or please feel free to email me and I will debate you more later. So moving on, I'm going to show some other archaeological evidence we have popping up. 1 second. All right. A bit of a delay right now. There we go. So just to begin our discussion on the evolution of these weapons, especially getting to the curvature. So this sword right here is from Nishapur, Iran, from the 9th century. And this is a piece that's from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And it's very similar to a lot of the swords, that were used by Central Asian nomads and even the Avars. But the difference here is that it's been fitted with a hilt more accustomed to what you would see in Sasanian blades. The hilt itself is set to an angle, and it shows a definite intent on the curvature of the blade. Some say, oh, well, the sheath is just warped, it's just rusted, it's just destroyed, it's deteriorating. It's a valid argument, but the fact that they've analyzed this and the hilt is set to the angle, the hilt is set to an angle to the blade, shows a definite intent in the curvature. It's very, very slight, very, very shallow, but the beginning of that curvature is seen. And this is way before the Mongols ever even came to Iran in the 13th century. And we also have firsthand accounts of Ajahiz Basra, who was an Arab chronicler that traveled to Iran. And here it says that he notes that the Persian troops of the so-called Khorasani region were better equipped than any other troops and relied heavily on their swords, which are slightly curved. So here we have a surviving archaeological account, and then we also have a firsthand account from the same century, denoting the curvature of the blades. We have this bowl from Nishapur as well. So now we have some artistic sources here that show a Khorasani warrior holding a slightly curved sword. One of the critiques of this piece is to the detractors of people saying that you shouldn't be using this as evidence of curved swords. Well, in my opinion, this sword, if the curvature was put in to make room, it'd be a heck of a lot closer to the end of the bowl. This could have remained straight, but it's so far away from the edge that I believe the curvature was fully intended. But that's a matter for debate. So here we see way before the Mongols showed up in the 13th century, you've got plenty of evidence here showing the curvature of these weapons. And this is minuscule. There's 3 or 4 more other bowls. There's a couple other excavated pieces in the Hermitage Museum that have shallow curved blades in earlier centuries. Just as a further proof of the evolution, we have what I just like to call a step saber here from the 12th to 13th century. Again, it said this could be from a steppe tribe, whether it's the Eurasian steppe or the Mongolic. We don't quite know at this point with this piece, but you see the curvature is definitely more defined in this piece right now. Trust me, if I knew what culture this was from, I would have put the culture. So I'm not using double standards, but I do not know at this current point. You see that defined curve slowly making its way down the end. So this is where they begin to curve. You see that steppe nomad influence even more and more. But now we have to look at the evidence of deeply curved swords before the Safavid era. Another big detractor of this statement is that these swords did not curve that much until the 16th century. Well, there are 3 Shamshirs. One is in the National Museum of Tehran. National Museum of Tehran. They are all attributed to Tamerlane. And Timur ruled from 1370 to 1405. And for those who don't know, Timur was very Persianized. He was, yes, a Turco-Mongol warlord, but he really loved Persian culture. Whenever he would go into cities, he tended to relocate artisans, especially Persian ones, Persian craftsmen, and bring them back to Samarkand. So he really, really enjoyed Persian culture. So it's no surprise to me that he had swords created for him in the Persian style. So if you look at the curvature of this piece, the earliest one, it actually is not as deep as the original Safavid sword that I showed. So this is getting there. It's nowhere near as exaggerated as the first one I showed you today, but you can tell it is developing, right? And there's not just one of these, but there's three. And a lot of people have stated that it could just be that a later century sword was retrofitted or or attributed to Timur later. But I believe with three of them coming up, and the three of them showing up, and as well as different different etching and cartouches that appear on this sword that match up with Timurid swords that were straight from the same time period, it puts a little more credence to these weapons developing much earlier than many historians give them credit for. I understand personally why this is fought. I get it. It's totally valid. But in my end of interpretation and organizations, these swords were developing with curvature way before the 16th century. All right, so I'm going to go back, stop screen sharing, and look at the comments. And this should actually be good timing to go in and show some techniques. All right, so let's see. David, I think the scimitar carries a connotation of inferior, evil, bad, dangerous, etc. Yeah, anti-Japanese, very good. I really like that. That's awesome. You should have made ignorance is perfect culture rather than lump them all together. If you're a time speaker, you can say ex-scimitar because it's an Italian word. You know what, Ken? That's a solid point. I can hand that to you. There could be a compromise in that. You know, very good. I like that. And what's happening with armor when the swords were evolving more? Good question. All right, so David, very good question on that. Shamshirs are actually described in manuscripts of actually being used to combat gaps in the armor. So the thing is that we have to understand is that you can thrust with this weapon, and we're going to see that in the demo. And on top of that, not all Persian helms, for example, had full face coverings, right? You often see like the Safavid era helms depicted as having the full aventails that cover the face. Not exactly always true. There could be gaps, you know, where the male might sit a little further back from the neck. Not all Persian warriors, or not all warriors of that time period, necessarily wore mail under their armor. Especially if you see lamellar, right? My suit is lamellar, and most Persian warriors, for example, wore mail under their lamellar in the Timurid period. Not everyone did. Could have been a choice. So you have techniques such as striking to the armpit to cut open the gambeson, and then actually pull your khanjar, your belt dagger, and then exploit that gap. So the Shamshir was used to combat the armor that was developing. So do the evolving swords alter in design? As in Europe, we see things designed the plate. You don't see it as much. You see the card begin to develop, and the Persian card is a straight, is a straighter. And my buddy Jesse has one. We can show you. Yeah, so this is a card. Looks like a big steak knife. But as you saw more mail and plate designs replacing lamellar, these cards came about that were straighter with a very, very tapered tip to the point that would allow you to pierce through mail. We didn't see that as much in Persian daggers prior to the card's introduction post 16th century. But it could just be that maybe they saw something like a rondelle and they went, oh, we should just stab through it with a dagger. You know, that could have been it. So yeah, David, I want to see the spine of that dagger. So this is more intended for more rigorous, like sport style combat, but it's a little beefier than normal. There's the spine. Thanks, Dave.
It's also flat spined, unlike historic.
Yeah, Jesse just told me it's also flat spined as opposed to a T spine. So that's it. Yeah, thank you, Anton, for pointing that out. Very good question. And again, I don't want to get thrown up with the techniques we have to show. So we're going to move on. Thank you for the little linguistic debate on saber and scimitar. It's a very good point, and I thank you for bringing it up. And it's something that we should all be doing as scholars and historians, challenging each other to think further. So I really appreciate that. It's definitely a valid linguistic choice if you're talking about being from that region. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's our job as educators to try to do a little more justice to the regions you came from. That's what I'm gonna say about that right now. So we're gonna get up out of our seats and we're gonna show some techniques. So essentially, we have to remember about the Shamshir. We're showing techniques from various manuscripts and manuals that talk primarily about combating people in armor. These techniques are also meant to be shown and used out of armor, obviously modified differently. But the great thing about Persian sources is that we see similar techniques appearing in manuscripts from as early as like the 12th century, but they're showing up all the way into like the 18th century. So like similar techniques that we have Barfark, Zidane, which is to strike the top of the head, that appears in so many manuscripts, which means people were literally, obviously, as we know, to cut the top of the head. People did that forever, but it appeared through many, many centuries. And that same technique was spoken about being used to distract an opponent, as well as it was being used to strike their head. So you can very easily still use that in armor, trying to distract them to follow up to an opening. And we'll see how that can translate as we get up. So let's make sure. So Ken, I recommend a good book or website with accurate info on curved non-European swords. I can give Matt this information, but Dr. Manusha Khorasani, our founder, has the book Arms and Armor from Iran. I would not offer getting it. I would not want to get it from Amazon because it's running for like some people are trying to sell it for $1,000 on Amazon. Order it through Razmafar. Arms and Armor from Iran, as well as Persian archery and swordsmanship. The translation of the manuscripts are in these books. So we're gonna get up and show some techniques. All right, let's make sure we can be seen. I know don't mind the clearly colonial Greek revival architecture in the back, but it's from our museum, so we can't do much about it. All right, can everybody still hear me? Thumbs up from Matt. You hear me? All right, so this is the Shamshir. And historically speaking, the Shamshir was usually always used in conjunction with a shield. There's very barely any evidence that dictates or speaks of this being used single-handedly. Being used alone. It just very, very rarely happens. I'm sure it could happen. You use your shield, get into a duel, you're gonna have it. But for the sake of these demonstrations, they're more commonly depicted with a shield, so we're going to use a shield. During the Safavid period, Persians began to adopt their own specific kinds of shield called the Sipar. These generally tended to come in usually steel or rhino hide. Yes, rhino hide, which is kind of cool. And these were often strapped in the back with 4 pieces of strapping, as opposed to a center grip. And they came in small sizes. Jesse has a medium, which he's going to grab right now. Medium, as well as large shields that were more akin to rotellas. But we all know about the size of a rotella. It's made out of steel. The rhino hide one's not so much. That's a lot of rhino hide to use for a large sipar. But for the sake of our demo today, we're going to be using the Timurid era of wooden shields, or even sometimes they were made like Kalkin shields. They're made with wicker overlap, similar to what the Ottomans used. But we're going to be using our Timurid wooden shields just because our arms and armor is from the Timurid period. So, a little tough. We're trying to make it work, I promise.
Push it back.
Yeah, try to push it back. We have another assistant, so this will be nice. All right, so the first technique we're going to show on my end is going to be, actually, they're not one of the thrusting techniques with the Shamshir. One of the ones everyone says you can't do. Well, guess what? If it has a tip, you can stab it into something. Let's just kill that idea right now. So, for example, a lot of times Persian warriors would meet with Shamshir Barfar Sedan, which is just right at the top of the head. Very, very like typical strike that you would see done. Just let me move grab the point and grab it. That's it. Thank you. So we're going to meet with Shamshir Barfar Sedan, which is right at the top of the head, right? We both counter. Now, manuscripts speak actually now about pinning your opponent's shield. So now I'm going to prep my Sicar high, pin the shield, and thrust over. Put back up a little bit this way. One more time. Right? Come over. Tell me I can't thrust. I just did it, and now he's dead. Now he's dead. I'm a little bitter about that, you can't tell. One more time. Now I'm going to stab him in the face. Now he's dead because I stabbed him with a curved sword. Anyway, move out a little bit from that. All right, so now, next technique we're going to show is another thrusting technique, which I'll actually allow Jesse to come to the screen and explain a little bit better. This thrusting technique is actually meant to be a thrust to the groin, as well as a thrust to the stomach, especially with some later period Persian charaniers with 4 mirror plate armor. You could actually sneak a nice thrust underneath the bottom of that armor. So, this is a great little use of the curvature of these swords. You can sneak it right under my guard. So same thing, we're going to meet Shamshir Barfar Sedan. Not every strike would be met this way, but it's a common strike that fighters often find themselves clashing at. Pulls right through to the groin. So he used the curvature of that weapon to draw through and thrust underneath my shield. Obviously, it comes with its risks because I could have done the same thing to him, but as you see, I'm not having a very good day. So basically, we have a question. Guess who Shamshir is one trainings? Yeah, it's actually Purple Heart Armory. It's a custom piece. If you see this on their site, it's actually my design. I have this whole thing kind of commissioned with them. So it's really great. So now we're going to show another technique that is going to involve cutting to the armpit. And this is something that was done often to expose a gap in armor or open up the gambeson for future strikes with the Kanjar. Throw your opponent to the ground, you have a nice big opening to stab them in the armpit. So same thing, let's go. So same thing, you strike the top of the head. I'm going to walk through. He comes around for a strike. I'm protected. In armpit, not so much. One more time. You both come. Again, hitting the arm if need be. Push over from the other side. Even if I don't nail it, look at this. I can thrust him. All right, so the final technique is we're going to show who can lead up and discuss this one, because I kind of cut you off last time.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Don't you want to say it?
No, you're It's your name on this, so.
Fine. Well, anyways, say hi to Jesse. He's my student. He's the best. I love him to death. All right. So the final one we're going to do, this is the hook. So this is one of the coolest examples that come from our manuscripts. You're actually using the back of the Shamshir to hook your opponent's blade out of the way and then cut them in the neck. This one's really great, but he's really good at it, so let's let that get shown right now. This one might be a little tough to see this far away, so actually, could you bring the computer closer? All right. Yeah.
Is that better?
So you pick it up, bring it a little bit closer. Pick it up.
Oh.
And just bring it so you can see this. There will be good. Just back up a little bit more. All right, so we're gonna do a regular speed and then we'll slow it down. Yeah. So let's break that down nice and slow, shall we? We start from Shamshir, Barfarks it on. Keep that hooks to the back of my Shamshir. Here's my sword, shield, and strikes to my head from my neck. Switch around this way, one more time. You can see how he does this. You come down, there, my weapon is hidden. I'm turned open and struck him in the neck. So that was one of my favorites.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. Hey, Vicky. So, hold on a second. So yeah, obviously not all of those are going to be done from the same attack, but it's just really good to show the clash from a very, very neutral point of combat. So let's see. Oh, good. I'm enjoying that. All right, crossover European sword and buckler, best techniques. Yeah, a lot of good crossover, Kent. This one from Zara, yeah. The universality, very good. Love that. So kind of going to thrust, you simply lower yourself following the downward movement of the sword. It seems like too quick to turn to avoid the thrust. Yeah, I usually just use the edge of the Scimitar or the shield to just hit the spine of the Shamshir down. That's how I've countered it.
Or later Persian armor seems actually
Yeah.
flat there to prevent that.
And there's actually, as Jesse was saying, there's much later periods of Persian armor that do have flaps in the front. But before that, you better watch out for your nether regions. Well, this has been really, really good timing so far. Again, I can have these sources and where they came from available to you. I know, speaking between all sword nerds, one of the detracting factors that I've had thrown at me is the availability of these, and I understand that because they're not made available in Western academic settings. It almost seems like, where are you getting this stuff from? Please trust me, they exist. I can send you the sources from where they're listed, cited, everything.
What I'll do, folks, is I'll after the conference I'll talk to Frank and I will get some sources put together for you and put them up on the History Live Northeast Facebook page. So if you follow History Live Northeast on Facebook, I'll get those put up there so you can look through them.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. So yeah, the last thing I'm going to say is, everyone, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for keeping the discussion civil and productive. And thank you for letting me go on that little bit of a tirade about thrusts. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this is you can thrust with a curved sword. I just want to make sure we all know that. But just because there are certain YouTubers who say you can't, that doesn't mean that's true. So make sure to put this in the post, David. Yeah, it's Razmafar. It's Farsi. It's a rough, weird translation. I'm convinced I'll never cut with a saber again. No, God, that's a bad idea. They're definitely better at cutting. Yeah, it's called Razmafar. If you just type in historical Persian martial arts on YouTube, you'll find us. Razmafar is a very rough kind of translation from Farsi to English, which roughly means battle weapons. I'm learning Farsi right now, and I'm still trying to understand what exactly that means, but I'm getting there. So I'll open up the floor for any questions, comments, concerns, insults. Go back to your own country, stuff like that.
Well, Frank, what drew you to this style of fighting? Because I know you have a long history of all sorts of different types of combat. You're a certified stage combat performer and stunt performer, and Frank and I actually met doing a Ren Fair up in northern Maine. He came all the way up from Rhode Island to northern Maine to do this amazingly small Ren Fair that we were both at. And while we were there, he started teaching me some moves that he taught some of you guys today. So, but what got you started in this particular style, Frank?
Well, my original draw to this came, like most good things do, out of spite. And I grew up on the Ren Fair circuit, right? And I just got kind of tired of, like, I was gonna be blunt and say it, I got very tired of the Eurocentrism. I just got very tired of, like, this idea that anything and everything that, like, existed in Europe was all there was in the Middle Ages. And growing up, I was always way more into, like, Aladdin and Sinbad than I ever was Knights of the Round Table as a kid. So I started just kind of researching online, I called it Scimitar when I first looked at it when I was a kid. I wasn't trying to Scimitar shame anybody, just saying that we should work on it. So I looked up Scimitar fighting, and on YouTube, Razmafar came up. And I contacted Dr. Khorasani, and I got linked up with him as a fighter, and just kind of took it from there. It's been a great skill set for me, especially in the film industry. I just made Screen Actors Guild as a stunt performer, and I have already used some of these techniques and understanding of Persian swordsmanship for a few characters that I played. So, like, it's already kind of paid off in that aspect as well. And now also, I've traveled the world a lot, been to a lot of different countries, and, like, I've always been personally more interested, in the Middle East and North Africa. I spent time in Morocco a few years ago, and I kind of left part of my heart there, and my interest in the Middle East and North Africa and the people and the culture just kind of bled over into my swordsmanship study. So that's why I'm into it. It began as an action out of spite to try to shut up ignorant people, and then I realized I don't have to be so edgy and mad at the world.
I'm gonna hold you to that one.
Oh, if anyone knows me, I still am edgy and mad at the world. So, Stefan, wait, you're from Germany? Dr. Khorasani is in Frankfurt. Don't know how close you are, but he's currently in Frankfurt. So I can link you up with him.
Frank, is there any one of these weapons that you haven't tried yet that you really love to learn and give a try?
Thus far in this Persian system, I've pretty much done everything except for all the weapons except for one set so far. There is documentation of, believe it or not, of the Nizeh used in conjunction with a large rotella of spear and shield. And this isn't just again a unit formation. This is spoken of in actual single combat. So there are techniques on that, but that's in the next rank that I haven't quite started in yet. So definitely, I haven't done spear and shield yet. My favorite, though, weapon, hands down, is the Nizeh, is our spear. That is hands down my favorite weapon in the system. And if I had to trust my life going into battle tomorrow, I'm taking the spear with me. So, anything else? Any other questions?
Does anybody else have any other questions for Frank? I'll let you guys either type it in the chat or open up the floor, and you can ask in real time.
Well, let me ask in real time.
Okay.
You should see the face of the person who's questioning. I wanted to, you mentioned the spear. I have started to develop an interest in spears. I was all swords pretty much, and maces and axes. Recently, through contact with a friend in Hurstwick, which is like a Viking research study group, I started realizing spears were everybody's tool, first tool probably. And I said, oh, well, I gotta find out about that. What is special, unique? How can you fight with a spear and a shield? I think that it would have to be pretty lightweight, but I don't know what the Persian, I missed how you said it, Persian spear is.
Yeah, the Nize. And well, something we're trying to figure out with that is that the Nize, it's definitely a modified version from what I've seen. The Daylamites in northern Iran were known to have fought with a short spear and shield. So this is not a long, like 6 foot long spear in the tradition that you would think it would be used. But it is some version of a spear. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a Nize in the traditional Persian term, but it's definitely a spear and shield.
Okay, cool,
Yeah.
thank you.
No problem.
Loved it.
So thank you so much. Tim, how easy is moving a full set of Lamellar armor? I believe kind of underrated type of protection. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, no, Lamellar is great. It's very easy, and everything is articulated so well in Lamellar that you're getting all the mobility, but in my honest opinion, you're not really sacrificing protection because the way the plates are overlapping, it's just as thick as you'd be wearing a solid plate of armor. It's just overlapping. I can move in it quite well. I've horseback ridden in my Lamellar before, and it's super comfortable.
So Anton says, you mentioned to stay in Morocco. I'm trying to research weapons and armor in 15th century Morocco, but I'm being defeated by a wall of silence. Are there any sources you could recommend? And thank you for a very interesting presentation.
Anton, so off the top of my head, I do not know of any because the one arms and armor museum that I wanted to go to in Morocco was closed when I went, logically. But there is an arms and armor museum in Morocco. So Anton, I will get to Matt and I will definitely find out the name of it. We stopped at on the tour, but it was closed. There's a lot of murky water with Morocco because it's unfortunate, but in the retaking of Spain, a lot of the books on arms and armor and swordsmanship techniques and manuscripts were all burned from the Alhambra. So all the stuff that was stored in the Alhambra was burned. So we've lost so much from North Africa and Morocco. David, because Satan. Yeah, I mean, essentially.
Does anyone have any other questions for Frank?
Can I have one?
Yes, Alex, go for it.
Thank you. Legend, or is it true, Sudanese swords being reused Crusader swords? Have you ever came across anything of that kind which you can substantialize, or is just a legend or urban legend?
Because I know that in Sudan, they had a lot of trade with Persians in the 19th century. So you do see a lot of like Kulakud style helmets being adopted by the Sudanese. But I wouldn't put it as something that was that far off, because if you think about the fact that like there was a large Christian population in Ethiopia, it's very possible that weapons that were sold to Ethiopians by the Crusaders could have made their way to the Sudan. That wouldn't shock me. So do I have evidence of it? No, but I think it's plausible. I think it's absolutely plausible.
So Damon actually spoke a little bit about this yesterday, talking about traditional African weapons. And he's on the other side of the coin. He doesn't believe that they were Crusaders. He believes that they did evolve organically. And I think somebody else talked a little bit about that too, I believe. So.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely believe their own styles evolved. But what I'm saying is the idea of getting secondhand stuff through trade was also there. I definitely think that we undercredit Africans for the development of their own arms and armor. But much like anywhere in Africa, you were at the crossroads of trade. So could they also have had Crusader weapons? Yes, but was it their only weapon?
Doesn't it strike you as odd that this specific typology stuck in Sudan and nowhere else?
Yeah. No, and because Satan, why not both? I think what the Israelites don't think maybe. Yeah, again, it's possible.
Elmsley might have, yeah. So we have time for one more question, basically, Frank, and this is the toughest question, the one question I'm asking all of my speakers. What is your favorite sword?
The spear.
Not just a short sword on a stick, right?
Yeah. No, but like I believe it or not, I started training Italian longsword when I was like 16. And I did that because as a Ren Fair, yeah, I see that, Dave, but as a Ren Fair performer using longsword, I wanted to learn how to do it for real to supplement my stage combat training. So best answer ever. Thanks, Devin. But yeah, definitely the spear. But I think obviously because I'm so accustomed to it and because I tend to do well with it, Shamshir is obviously my favorite. It's just my bias, but still the spear.
Well, Frank, Perrin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really fascinating talk. Thank you to Jesse, your student and assistant for today. Jesse, sorry, if Frank had mentioned it earlier, I would have gotten you into the program with everybody else, but sorry,
No,
I
that's
ran out of time on that. But
No, when we're doing this stuff in the future, Jesse is often attached to my hip, so
I'll remember that. I'll remember that. So we're going to get some information. We'll put it up on the History Live Northeast Facebook page. So like and follow History Live Northeast Facebook page, and we'll get you in contact with all that information that we talked about. We're going to take an hour break now, lunch break basically for me. And we will be back at 11 o'clock Eastern time with Reese Nelson and Ben Bruce doing the art of harness fetching. If they're the from Pursuing the Knightly Arts. And yet again, Frank, thank you again so much. And I'll talk to you later. All right, everybody.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.